being here. You know, one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about library work is that I think that it's very difficult to be happy and healthy and productive without learning and growing as we move through life. And so I'm so happy that you're here with us tonight to learn. You see these beautiful portraits on the walls, which Jerry Scott Nickey is going to tell us a little more about. And there's probably some people on the wall who you feel that you know a lot about, and there's probably some people that maybe you don't recognize, maybe you don't know as much about. And you know, I think that we're going to learn a lot about these individuals throughout the month, and all sorts of different topics. We're so fortunate to have a variety of different speakers this month, and I hope that you'll join us for all the events throughout the month. So thank you so much for being here. I have the honor to introduce one of our guests this evening, Councilman Linda Habgood, and Acting Mayor of Westfield, who I'd like to invite up just to make a few remarks for us tonight.
I'm just going to stand over here, if that's okay. Welcome, everyone. As Alan mentioned, my name is Linda Habgood. I'm one of the council members, and Shelley Brindle, our mayor, wasn't able to make it tonight, so you're stuck with me. It's really my distinct honor to be with you tonight in this curated space and to celebrate the collective efforts of the Friends of the Westfield Memorial Library, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Association of Westfield, and the library itself. This evening, we will all be the beneficiaries of a beautiful intersection of art, history, education, and a lifting up of our community's diverse background. I applaud the leaders of each of the organizations who were involved in putting this event and all of the Black History Month events together. There's so many. A friend, Jerry's Skudnicki, am I pronouncing that right, Jerry? Okay. Was a really big part of making sure that this very specific group of portraits were here for us to enjoy this month. The Christine Mason and Cindy Colicchio, are you here tonight? The co-presidents of the Friends, thank you for all of your efforts. Liz Wolfe, the director of the MLK Association, isn't here tonight, but Dawn Nickel-Manning is here in her stead. And I also want to give a big shout out to our library director, Alan McGinley, who, right? What a gift Alan is to our community. He's only been here for 3.5 years, but I don't know anyone who has done more to bring organizations in our town together, from the Y to the Downtown Westfield Corporation. Everywhere I go, someone's working with Alan. I'm on an HVAC committee with him. He's involved, you know, now I just joined the Westfield Public Arts Commission. So, you know, we're now showing and collecting all these art. And Alice Dillon, I also want to recognize you because I understand that you were a big part in putting a little bug in Alan's ear from his very early start here to bring this together. So thank you. Tonight is the kickoff event for Black History Month. And this art exhibit is an exploration of the power of truth. It's a carefully curated exhibit of 14 portraits, all by Robert Shetterly from his Americans Who Tell the Truth collection. And they are all here to help us learn more about and celebrate the Black experience. The exhibit and our wonderful speaker tonight will help us to usher into the community the stories of the brave and unshakable leaders all around the world, all around this room, who have stood up for democracy, equality, and civil rights. Robert Shetterly says that his work is used to the power of art to illuminate the ongoing struggle to realize America's democratic ideals and model the commitment to act for the common good. Those are his words. And I'm gonna say them again because particularly in this month and in this place, I think that's something for all of us to remember. He says his work uses the power of art to illuminate the ongoing struggle to realize America's democratic ideals and model the commitment to act for the common good. A very important reminder. I hope all of you will take some time tonight to not only listen to our speaker, but to really spend time in front of each of these portraits, hear the stories, and think about what all of these people meant to our American ideals and to the communities that we live in today. And so with that, I would like to introduce Jerry, who's going to tell us more about the exhibit, and just thank you so much for being here.
Again, welcome. You all know who I am now since I've been introduced twice. And much of what I was going to say has already been said. But truthfully, I'm a member of the Friends of the Westfield Memorial Library. We're a 100% volunteer organization, and our goals are to support the library either financially or by our volunteers in activities that will aid to have them reach the mission of the library. A number of our activities are listed on a flyer that I put up shamelessly on the back wall, on the back table. But one of those activities is the 2025 Black History Month celebration. As you've heard, it's in collaboration or in partnership with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. of Westfield Association, the library itself. And the fundamental idea, or the fundamental part of this program is the Americans Who Tell the Truth. And as has been mentioned, this is an organization started and furnished by Robert Shetterly, an artist, historian, who's identified a number of Americans who tell the truth. And these Americans who tell the truth are those who have stood up against oppression, for civil rights, for gender equality, a number of critical issues. And they had the courage to speak up and identify and address these issues. It is a nonprofit, broad-based organization, and as such, we are thankful for their collaboration with us on this very important program. The essence of our program, though, throughout the month, and again, these portraits will be up for the entire month, and there's codes that are associated with that that give the full description of these individuals. 14 portraits were selected, and Bob Shetterly had made them, and there's also a comment that the individuals have made on each of the portraits. Additionally, Robert has derived some unique narratives that are associated with these individuals. And the whole point of our things, again, as it has been mentioned, we're going to have 4 different sessions, evenings in February, and there will be a themed discussion in terms of individual portraits. And those are indicated in the program and in the booklet. From the point of view of the magnitude, breadth, and depth, the 2025 Black History Month celebration is really an ambitious undertaking. It was an experiment. This is the largest, we've been active in terms of Black History Month for a long time, the Friends, that is, but this is the most ambitious event that we've had with respect to this. And I offer my sincere gratitude to the creative, hardworking, and inspiring committee for making this happen. Those members are listed in the program booklet. But I also want to acknowledge Alice Dillon, who we've worked with, who's a former member of the Friends, and who had brought this to our attention, Alan's attention, to our attention several years ago. She has been and continues to be active in Black History Month celebration. So again, a round of applause for her. Thank you. And I should point out that the members of the committee are listed in the front page of the booklet of the program for the month. At this point, I'd like to introduce Alexander Liu, who will then introduce our today's speaker.
Thanks for the opening remarks, Jerry, and thank you for coming, Councilwoman Habgood. As Jerry mentioned, my name is Alex Liu. I'm a member of the Friends of the Westfield Memorial Library, and I'm privileged to be part of this program and have the honor of introducing the speaker and discussion leader for the very first session of this program. Keith Walcott is a professor at UCNJ, Union College of Union County, New Jersey, formerly known as Union County College, just up the road. He specializes in African American history and is widely respected and held in high regard by his fellow colleagues and his students. Students consistently call him a fantastic professor and one of the best professors they've ever had. Please join me in welcoming Keith Walcott.
Can you hear me? Through the microphone? Thank you so much for this invitation to come here to speak. The subject is something that I love to teach. I can't tell you just how excited I am to be teaching this subject. This is all I teach at the college. I get a whole lot of participation in my classes because the students are learning things, that they've never, some have never heard some of these things before. They didn't even know they were in history. I often tell them, look, this is it could be very painful, to hear some of the things that happen, but it is history. And that's how I teach it. I teach it as history. So tonight we will be talking about the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. I will not get into full with the Civil Rights Movement, but we'll start at slavery and the Underground Railroad as a start for where we will head with this lecture. Okay, so the scope will be from about 1820 to about the 1950s, the middle of the 1950s. All right. So without further ado, I will start with the first slide. All right. So most historians estimate that the time of the Underground Railroad, was around 1820 to about 1860. Well, 1860 is the period when the Civil War, when Lincoln comes to the presidency, and the South sees him as anti-slavery, and of course, the first state to leave the Union is going to be South Carolina, and then it's going to be followed by 7 other states. Then it's going to be followed about 3 more for a total of 11 states are going to leave the Union. But I want to start with 1820 because 1820 is a pivotal moment, because in 1820, this is the time we're adding states. I don't know if some of you know, but we kept acquiring more and more land. In 1803, 1804, Thomas Jefferson, one of the great things that he did, besides writing the revolutionary document, but he offered France some money for a large plot of land, which today we call the Louisiana Purchase. This land almost doubled the size of the United States. And of course, we offered France $15 million for that. If you can get land that cheap today, oh my gosh. It came to 3 cents an acre. 3 cents an acre. But France was broke because France and England were always on a war path with each other. How many know that when you are at war, your treasury goes down, So the treasury in France was down, so France grabbed at the chance to get the $15 million. And so hence, we have this large plot of land. And in 1820, Missouri is a territory. When you're a territory and you want to become a state, there's certain rules that you have to follow. You have to have a certain number of families in that territory, and then you have to write a constitution, and then you apply for statehood. So Missouri applies for statehood, but they're applied as a slave state. Now, Americans were, in the North particularly, were already nervous about this institution called slavery. They did not want it to expand. At this point in our history, we have 11 slave states, we have 11 free states, so there's a balance. And those who oppose slavery are hoping that you will never get more slave states, so that as time progresses and slaves die and get their freedom by other means, that, slavery would eventually die. So lo and behold, Missouri, some call it Missouri, applies to join the United States Union as a slave state. And this causes an uproar in the country. This causes an uproar. Why? Because, again, there are 11 slave states and 11 free. It's going to off-balance everything. So this is the first time our nation is facing a crisis that could split the nation up. Fortunately, we had a man called Henry Clay. If you ever hear Jeopardy and they ask you who is the great compromise, you know his name, Henry Clay, because this is going to be the first of 3 compromises that he will come up with. So in order to stop the nation from breaking up, he comes up with a compromise. Maine at the same time wanted to break away, from, I believe it was Massachusetts at the time. They wanted to become a state. So he had a brilliant idea. Well, why not? Let's do this to maintain the balance. We'll let Missouri come in as a slave state. Maine will come in as a free state. But let's make a rule. Latitude 3630. Let that be the line where any new territory coming in as a new state, okay? If you're north of that, you can't be a slave state. If you're south of that, you can be. Of course, this was already a problem because if you look at Virginia, Virginia is already both north and south of latitude 3630. But anyway, it temporarily quiets down everything. But Thomas Jefferson called the compromise a fire bell in the night. What does he mean by this? Well, he means that the issue of states' rights and slavery, has only just began. And the nation is going to face it again because those people who hate slavery, okay, and Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder, those people who hate slavery will continue to try to take away our states' rights. So he knew it was going to come up again. All right? Of course, by 1820, there were some new states that had already entered the Union. For example, in 1819, we had Alabama entered, and Alabama became one of the leading cotton-producing states with a whole lot of slaves. We also had Mississippi came in, I believe, 1817. Mississippi also became a slave state, growing cotton as well. And 5 years before that, Louisiana had become a state, okay? And these 3 states that I just mentioned became the leading cotton states. So Missouri never became a leading cotton state, but it became a leading slave state, though. So by 1820, now runaways began somewhere around 1810. You had people started to run away, slaves started to run away from slavery. But by 1920, that number grew, and it was against this backdrop that the Underground Railroad station, or the Underground Railroad was birthed. Because with all these slaves running away, some of them are going to need help, and hence the Underground Railroad. So there was a need to help escapees. And then you had the 1930s come around. We just left the 1830s, I'm sorry. You have the 1820s just passed. Now you have the 1830s. And the 1830s is the decade that you're going to find the most slaves running away to freedom, okay? And the necessity of helping these slaves escape to the north and the Underground Railroad became tied together even more securely in the decade of the 1830s, all right? Let me backtrack a little bit. In 1793, right after we got our independence and we wrote our declaration, our Constitution, in 1793, a couple years after the Constitution was ratified by the 13 states, and we became a nation, they added a fugitive slave law. But that fugitive slave law had no teeth. In other words, the states that they were running away to did not follow that law. They did not send these runaways back. All right? So here we are in the 1830s, and states in the South are beginning to realize, look, states' rights is going to be a big issue if we're going to keep this institution going. They felt they had the right to protect the institution of slavery. Why? Because they were reaping huge profits. At one point in time, the state of Mississippi was the richest state in this Western hemisphere. Very rich. And what was it based on? Based on cotton. And what was cotton? Cotton was done by the slaves. You see, in 1793, slavery, let me go back a little bit again. Slavery was, right after the revolution, many thought that slavery would have died. It was slowly dying. But then you had Eli Whitney, a British inventor, invent this primitive machine called the cotton gin. And now a slave can produce 4 times more cotton. And all of a sudden, slavery is revived. And that's why you have states now like Mississippi, who came in so late and still become such a rich state. But it's all based on this increased production of cotton. At one point in time, we were selling nearly all of the world's cotton. We were selling 7/8 of the world's cotton. 7/8, okay? And becoming very rich off of cotton. So, the southern states felt that they had a reason to protect this institution called slavery. And so we're in the 1830s. When we left the 1820s, we had some problems with, Andrew Jackson. He felt he was robbed out of an election back in 1824. He didn't storm the Capitol or anything like that. But I don't mean that negatively. But I'm just giving you some backdrop. But anyway, I meant not him, but his followers didn't do that. But what he did is that he split the existing party, which was called the Democratic Republican Party, and he formed the Democratic Party as you know it today. Okay, so he formed the Democratic Party, him and Martin Van Buren. Okay, so when he ran for elections again 4 years later, of course he won overwhelmingly. Okay, that election he felt he should have won. There were 4 candidates, but none of them got the Electoral College vote. I think it was 113 at the time, because we didn't have the number of states we have today. So 131, that's what it was. But no one reached 131, but he got the most. He had 91 electoral votes. John Quincy Adams had 84. Okay? And the other 2, Henry Clay had the least. He had 37. I forgot who was the third candidate. I can't remember his name right now, but he had 54. So when that happens, you know that the House of Rep has to pick the presidency. You know that, right? If you don't have an Electoral College win, it goes to the House of Rep. But the House of Rep decided to choose Quincy Adams, who only had 84, 9 electoral votes less than Andrew Jackson. So John Quincy becomes the next president, and of course after that the party is split, and next election Jackson wins, astoundingly, and then his presidency is going to go into second term in the 1830s. So the 1830s now come. By the way, the 1830s is going to end up being the period with the most runaways. More slaves ran away from slavery successfully in the 1830s than in any other decade before the Civil War. So during that time, there was a protective tariff that was put in place where the southern states felt that it negatively affected them. And again, the Union was threatened with a breakup. We know this as the nullification crisis. The southern states decided, look, we're not going to even recognize this tariff. We're just going to call it null and void. I guess that's where they got the the term from, and again the Union is threatened with a crisis that could break the Union up. And here goes Henry Clay again with another compromise, and that temporarily quieted down the breakup of the Union. By 1838, my good friend over there, Frederick Douglass, you can see him, the first picture, he successfully runs away from slavery in Maryland. And I always tell my students, if I read his literature, I have to have a dictionary nearby, okay? And he was taught to read and write by his master's wife. And it was at a time when it was said that African Americans did not have the capacity to learn to read and write. But his oratory skills were so awesome that even today, those words you don't hear too often, and they're real words. So, and you can see his picture there, and he became a leader in the abolition movement. Later on, he is embraced by the leader of the abolition movement, a great man, William Lloyd Garrison. How many have heard of him? William Lloyd Garrison, a great man, but he so hated slavery. And he even was in jail in the South, the Upper South, I believe it was in Maryland, for a few months because someone accused him of libel against him, and he was found guilty. But he embraced Frederick Douglass and even encouraged him, to go around and show his oratory skills, so that white people in the North would see that, look, what they say about black people is not true. They can be literate and they can excel just like anybody else. So I really appreciate him. Okay. New states are, how did we get that far? Did I skip one of them? Let's go back. Oh no, I didn't skip. Okay, we talked about Frederick Douglass. So now we're going to get to the Compromise of 1850, but this is going to follow a war in the decade of the 1840s. So we got the decade of the 1840s. We're going to have a fight with Mexico. Okay, from that Mexican-American War, again we're going to get more land, much more land. We're going to gain California, New Mexico. We had already annexed Texas. Mexico was hoping to get them back, but they had become an independent nation. They're the only state in our union that was once an independent nation on its own. Okay? And for 10 years. But Mexico had hoped to get them back. I don't know if any of you watched the Alamo. That's real too as well. How many watched the Alamo? That's a real thing that happened. But we annexed them during that time. And after the Mexican-American War, which America won, Victor gets the spoils, of course, right? Victor gets the spoils, so we get to have all these nice territories, including California, New Mexico, Utah, parts of Arizona, parts of Colorado, and of course we annexed Texas, okay? And we did give Mexico, even though we won the war, we gave Mexico $15 million for all this territory again. I don't know, 15 million, the word 15 seemed to be a favorite thing. But of course, this is still a lot of land for just that little bit of money. So as new states are added now from this territory that we just gained, in the 1850s, the price of a slave is now the equivalent of a luxury car today, okay? So the Compromise of 1850, again, Henry Clay's work, because the northern states did not want these territories to become slave states. So, but under the agreement, California is going to become a free state, New Mexico is going to become a slave state, and Utah and the others are going to be decided later. Texas is a slave state because when it was annexed into the Union, it was already a slave state when it was under Mexico, all right? So these new states are added through the Compromise, but what the Compromise did also is that it added a new fugitive slave law because the one in 1793 had no teeth. Okay? And this one now, if you harbor a slave, you can be prosecuted, you can go to jail, your family can go to jail, okay? And they plan to enforce this law. So having said that, you know, it was dangerous for people working in the Underground Railroad to be doing that. And yet we had some great people who would work in the Underground Railroad and to help people. Things got so bad that, you know, you even had fights in Congress. I put that note right there for you. Between 1838 and 1860, because of the issues with slavery, those who wanted slavery and those who didn't want it, you had physical fights in Congress. There was a time when a senator, I believe his name was Senator Brooks, beat another senator with his cane. Senator Sumner broke the cane all over his head, and the poor man was laying there almost dying. They rushed him to the hospital. He was in hospital for months. He almost died. These are the things that happened. And then you had a duel. You had a duel between Jonathan Silly and who's the other guy? I forgot his name. I put his name. You know, sometimes you don't remember them all. But I think William Graves. And William Graves, you know, felt that Jonathan Silly insulted him. Jonathan Silly was anti-slavery, okay? And he said, come out with your gun. Because duels were allowed then. Do you know we had a duel right in Weehawken? You didn't know that? Yeah, we had a duel. How many saw Hamilton on Broadway? Okay. So now you know what that duel was. Okay? So duels were allowed. And he killed Silly right there on the spot. But this is how tense our country had become because of slavery. Those who hated the institution and those who loved it. But during the same period, between 1838 and 1860, slave codes became very harsh and even more brutal, and runaways more frequent. So talking about runaways again, so we're in the 1840s because we're still talking about the Mexican-American War, okay? By 1849, Harriet Tubman, I believe her photo is somewhere back there, she escapes to freedom from Maryland. So she gains her freedom, and what a woman she was. You know, her husband didn't want to come, so she went by herself, and when she got to Philadelphia, she was there for 2 years, she worked, and then she decided to go back for him. She didn't know that he had married somebody else. So it broke her heart, but that didn't discourage her. When she came back, she decided to go back again, this time for family members, and she was successful. I don't know if any of you watched that movie that was, it was a great movie. It was pretty accurate. But yeah, she went back in so many times and rescued so many people. That's why her picture is up there. She was a great Underground Railroad, person, one that did so many great things. So you see the necessity of the Underground Railroad. During the period too, slave codes had to become so much more harsh, brutal, and runaways more frequent. I have a picture here to show you. How many watched Will Smith's last movie, Emancipation? You know, I was so mad at him when he slapped Chris Rock, but but when I saw that movie, I said, you redeemed yourself, brother. But yeah, because he did a great job. But I wanted to show you, let me see if I could, I don't know if I should try this and get out of here and then can't get back in. But I wanted to show you a picture of a man. Maybe I can show you from my notes here. But this is the man that Will Smith played. I'll let you pass it around so you can see what his back looked like. But this is a testament of how brutal, here we go, how brutal slavery was. I better keep my PowerPoint on. This man, you see him? Look at his back. Look at his back. This is who Will Smith played in that movie. When he escaped at the beginning of the Civil War and went to the North, he showed them his back. And this gives the North more teeth to say, look, you know what we're doing to end this evil institution called slavery is good, because they saw his back. Everyone can see it in the back.
Can you pass it around?
Yes, please. Yes. So if you haven't watched Emancipation, watch it, because that's the slave that Will Smith plays, and he showed his back too in the movie as well. Again, you're going to see why now the railroad is so important, because if you have this type of brutality, and you have, how many of you watched 12 Years a Slave? Again, I always tell my students, I don't want you learning African American history from the movies, because they, sometimes they're not accurate. So I want you to learn it from history itself. But that was pretty accurate too as well. Here was a man, that was born free in New York, was lured into Washington, D.C. with a promise that, look, you're a very good violinist, you're a fiddleist, so, we got a job for you in a band. And when he got down to D.C., they robbed him of his papers, his freedom papers, because even if you're born free, as a black person in this country, you had to travel with your freedom papers. And as he traveled down to D.C., they took his papers from him, and they sent him into the worst place that a slave could ever go. That picture that you saw there happened in Louisiana. That was the worst place for a slave to be sent, okay? And of course, he spent 12 years as a slave until one of his neighbors, a white neighbor in New York, he was able to get a letter over to him somehow, and he came to Louisiana and say, yes, he was born free, and he got his freedom. Now, he did write a book, and he made just about 300 and something thousand, which was quite a bit in that time, but I don't know that I would want to be in his place, okay? But I also mentioned that movie to say, in that same movie, you will see, one of the ladies, her master had told her, I have to sell your children. Do you remember that part? Anyone remembers that? Okay, and she cried, she begged him, please, and she never got over it. But this is the kind of cruelty that was happening, during the slave trade here. We had gotten rid of the Atlantic slave trade. That was banned in 1808, but it was replaced with the domestic slave trade. I try not to talk too much about this, but even in Maryland, you had places where black women were taken and they were bred selectively. They would choose the men with what they perceived to be the strong genes that could give them a strong child, and they were selectively put with these men. So these things were happening in slavery, and the North knew them. We have a man that, his name was John Brown. I don't know if you ever heard of John Brown, but today we can't decide if he was a hero or a villain. I think he was a hero, but, a lot of people said, but he broke the law. But he so hated slavery that he and his sons decided to rob the Piccadilly Arsenal in Virginia to arm the slaves for a rebellion. Of course, it wasn't successful. His boys were killed, and he was hanged. But even today, they can't decide if he was a villain or a hero. But this is why the North, hated slavery so much, because the institution had not only continued to grow, but it had continued to become more and more brutal. So there were numerous underground railroad stations, and I put a list of some of them here. You did have some in New Jersey as well. I took one here that in Greenwich Township at Bethel AME Church. That was one. But there were more in New Jersey as well. In Pennsylvania, Mother Bethel AME. You also had 12th Street Station. You also had in Massachusetts, you had William and Mary Jackson and their daughter and her daughters. The husband had died early, and she still kept helping runaway slaves. The home was open to abolitionists. also. So if an abolitionist came, whether he was white or black, they could stay at that home, okay, but also escaped slaves. And it is now a museum. It's called Jackson Homestead. So if you want to look up Jackson Homestead, you know what it used to be. In New York City, you had Plymouth Church, known as Grand Central Depot, Underground Railroad. And you had numerous stations that existed in Michigan. These were critical as a final stop, because after 1850, slaves are no more stopping in New York, because New York is not safe anymore. They head into Canada West, which is, Ontario. So they would head into Canada, and, but on the way they will be housed in churches and taverns and inns. And I'm reading a book right now by a guy called Levi Coffin. Anyone ever heard of him? Great man, a great man. He was a Quaker minister, but he helped so many slaves to escape, to runaway slaves to get to their destination. He endangered his wife. He endangered his children, because the law had grown so strict after 1850. If they had found him with runaways, he could have been put in jail. His family could have be put in jail. But he risked all of that just to help these slaves get away. So we get to 1860, Lincoln becomes president, and the South says he is no good. He is anti-slavery. He's going to end this institution. So starting with South Carolina, he's going to break away from the Union, and then it's going to be followed by the other 10. Okay, and Lincoln will wait a year and then declare war on them when they don't come back. And of course, we know that today as the Civil War. And I always tell the students, there were more deaths in the Civil War, just over 750,000, than all the deaths if you add them together from all the wars that we fought. So Americans killed each other during that war more than lives that were lost in all the wars. If you talk about World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the Gulf War under H.W. Bush, and even the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, those people that died, those Americans that died, will never add up to the number that have died in the Civil War. Not to mention those who became maimed and unable to ever function properly again. All right? So we're not going to go into the Civil War, but we will go into what happened after the Civil War. So after the Civil War, we have something called Reconstruction. They're not just reconstructing what has been blown apart by the cannonballs and all that. What they're trying to do, they're trying to reconstruct the hearts of Americans so we will never have Americans fighting each other again. Okay? So that was the main goal of Reconstruction. Now, many historians say that for African Americans, it was a failure, and I have to agree. After, I see all that has happened, because there was no definite period to end Reconstruction. Reconstruction is going to end abruptly. But let's start from the top here. So after the victory over the Confederacy, 12 years of Reconstruction started. The newly freed African Americans now, are going to begin a desperate search for lost family members. And if you ever read the accounts, they would bring a tear to your eye. There was one guy, his wife was sold from under him, and he set out to find her, but he was already remarried, because it's been many years she's been gone, But he found her, and then he said, but I can't come see you. He said, I never stopped loving you, but I am remarried. It's stories like that break your heart. You had one man that walked from Maryland, to, I forgot what other state, but it was hundreds of miles, nothing much on his feet, just to find where his children had been sold into another slave state. Okay? So there was a mad rush to find family members and, who were victims of the domestic slave trade. And of course, after that, African Americans become sharecropping. It's going to start doing Reconstruction, but it's going to ram up once the troops leave. Black codes to control the now 4 million African American population is instituted in virtually every former Confederate state. And it's aided and abetted by hate groups. I know everyone knows about the Ku Klux Klan, but there were more than that. There was the Knights of the White Community, the White Caps, among others as well. And they are there to bring violence against African Americans so that they understand just because the Civil War has ended and the institution doesn't mean that you have gained any much more, and you still have to be in your place. So violence against African Americans forced the passing of the first Civil Rights Act in 1875. A lot of people don't know that there was an act in 1875. Now, it did last only 8 years. It was never really instituted because by 1883, the Supreme Court had ruled that it was unconstitutional and struck it down. And that's 1875. 2 years later, we had another compromise. This time, it was because the elections ended and you had the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate both claiming that they won the presidency. Sounds familiar? So, the South got wise. The South is all Democratic now. It's called, they're solid Democratic. And they decided, look, we don't like the troops of the North here with guns telling us what to do during Reconstruction, so why not make a deal with them, let their candidate be the president, and make an agreement to end Reconstruction. So this is how Reconstruction ends, because nobody won the presidency, and the Republican Party decides, yeah, so we're given the chance to have our candidate be the president, we'll take it, and we'll pull the troops out. So the troops are going to leave in 1877. So the compromise did two things. It decided who would be president, and it ended Reconstruction. As soon as Reconstruction ended, segregation began immediately. Immediately. Okay, it wasn't legal at the time, but it began immediately. It became legal in 1896 when Homer Plessy, and if you see a picture of Homer Plessy, you can't tell that he is a black man. You cannot tell. You look up his picture, you cannot tell. But he was 1/8. I know you heard of the 1/8 rule, right? He was 1/8, and he decided to test the system. He bought a ticket for the first class seat, which was reserved for white people only, and he was asked to move, and of course he refused, and he was thrown off the train. He decided to sue. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and he lost the case. The Supreme Court said it is okay to be separate as long as it's equal. So that's where you get the doctrine of separate but equal. So this is going to last so long. But as soon as the troops leave, the South Americans, African American oppression is increased in every Confederate state. Suppression of the black vote was one of the first actions taken against African Americans. And I gave you a statistic here to show you. 1896, okay, there were still a lot of black people that were men that had voted. 130,000 men in Louisiana voted, okay? 8 years later, look at the number that voted. 1,304, because, they were deprived of their right to vote. Southern Democrats forced a decrease in black politicians as well. Some politicians had, some blacks had become politicians during the period of Reconstruction, and now there's a decrease there that has taken place. There was also an increase in lynching. Mark Twain wrote I don't know if you call it a pamphlet or an essay, yes. He wrote an essay. It was called "The United States of Lyncherdom." Anyone has heard the title? Mark Twain. The United States of Lyncherdom, because he saw so many, he experienced so many lynchings during his lifetime and he was, he was very critical of it, but not openly. And of course, Mark Twain was his writer's name. Okay, that was his writer's name, and he did not publish his essays during his lifetime. It was published 12 years after his death, but it talked really about all the lynchings that were going on and how, we were sending missionaries and those out to other countries, but really, we need to send missionaries here to teach Americans how to, to live together. Anyway, we had an increase in lynchings, and two prominent black leaders emerged during the 1800s. Booker T. Washington, we don't talk too much about him. Why? Because, most historians now see him as an accommodationist, meaning he was willing to accept the status quo, but anyway, it was him and W.E.B. DuBois, right here. You see him right here. W.E.B. DuBois are going to be the ones that arise to be the leader, to try to move the race forward, move the black race forward. All right? But later on, they're going to become enemies of each other, and Du Bois is going to rise and never stop rising until, the NAACP is formed, which we're going to talk about a little bit. 1905, Du Bois and other black and white activists, and I always tell my students, nothing would have happened for black people in this country if you didn't have a group of white people who saw the wrong and decided we're not going to stop until it's corrected. And they risked their lives. They risked their lives. They risked their reputation to join African Americans to seek equal, rights, to seek justice. All right? So this group of black and white activists met in Niagara to discuss ways to combat the violence and the political disenfranchisement against African Americans. Du Bois is considered to be the leading voice at the meeting by many. He's a very brilliant man, one of the first black men to receive a PhD in history from Harvard University. I believe he had his undergraduate from Fisk, I think it was Fisk, and then he went on to Harvard and got his PhD in history. And he became not only an educated, but a leading voice in what would now become the Niagara movement, okay? So it's going to get its name from the first place they met, and the next time they meet, they're going to be known as the Niagara movement. The meeting in Niagara attracted white and black leaders. They demanded an end to segregation. The Niagara movement emerged from this, and it attracted 400 white and black Americans bent on bringing about change and progress for African Americans. Just a little bit about Booker T here. His dispute with Du Bois was so sharp that he even sent spies in to try to sabotage the meeting, to try to get names of people that were there to try to report them to the government as trying to be anti-government. He didn't succeed. By 1915, he dies, and even before his death, the movement that will come out of this is going to grow by leaps and bounds. Okay, so 4 years this movement lasted. It lasted 4 years. The last meeting was at Oberlin, Ohio, 1908, but it became very controversial. Now, it became controversial because it was at this meeting that some black leaders decided to really rail on the Republican Party and President, who was the president then? It was McKinley, right?
No, that would have
Teddy
been
Roosevelt.
Well, yeah, but they railed on him too as well. They railed on him too as well for Brownsville. I don't know if you heard of the Brownsville affair. There was some violence in Brownsville, and Teddy Roosevelt it was told that, it was caused by the black troops, and without a trial, he dishonorably discharged them. So one of the things that came up in this controversial thing was that we're not going to forgive him for that, okay? And they talked about, was it McKinley? That who followed Roosevelt?
Yeah.
Taft. All right, I lost something there. But anyway, so, but they were very critical of the Republican Party and encouraged all black people to leave the party. And some who had felt endeared, by the Republican Party because of Lincoln, felt this was wrong. You can't do this. You cannot put down the party that helped you to get out of slavery. So this caused a big rift in the Niagara movement, okay? And also you had two men in there. Both are Harvard-educated, DuBois and William Monroe Trotter, and these two men could not get along. Two black men, they could not get along. So this, between the controversial statements at the Oberlin, Ohio meeting, and the internal conflicts between DuBois and William Monroe Trotter, the Niagara movement kind of falls apart. But out of that movement, so it essentially died in 1908. That same year, a race riot occurred in Springfield, Illinois, and the next year, inspired by a new abolitionist spirit by a white Southerner. White Southerner, he came up with a new abolitionist spirit. White liberals and black activists, several from the Niagara movement, under the leadership of W.E.B. DuBois, came together to form the NAACP the next year in 1909. The same NAACP that we have today. From the outset, the NAACP intended to use the court system. I really love teaching this, especially all the different court cases that they came up with, to try to. I always tell the students, Jim Crow or segregation was like a big boulder. Maybe half of in here. None of us can move it. Any bodybuilders in here? No? So you can't move it. But what you got to do, you got to chip away at it. If you get it small enough, then you can push it away. So this is going to be the goal of the NAACP from the very beginning, using the legal system to chip away at Jim Crow and finally bring it down. Okay? First they wanted, now Plessy ruling says that it is okay to be separate as long as it's equal. But in reality, it was never equal. It was never equal. So the NAACP is going to use these battles, to bring about change. One of the first battles had to do with funding in education. I believe it was in Georgia. You had a black student, money allotted for a black student, $4.76, whereas a white student, $36. You had teachers, a white teacher getting paid $98, a black teacher, $20-something. I don't remember the exact amount, and they're doing the same thing. So there needed to be some, equality in funding and in teacher pay. All right, so the NAACP won its first battle in 1915 when the Supreme Court struck down Oklahoma's grandfather clause, okay? Louisiana had a grandfather clause too as well, but this one was in Oklahoma, okay? And what it basically said, if your direct male ancestor, didn't vote in the 1866 election, then you can't vote. You know what happened in 1866? They're still under Reconstruction. They had just come out of slavery. So this is going to disenfranchise almost every black male in Oklahoma and in Louisiana that had it. Louisiana that had it too as well. Poll taxes and literacy tests continued though. Again, these were other methods that were used to keep the black voter count low because, as you know, it was illegal to teach black people to read, and of course they remained poor as sharecroppers. So even though the poll tax may have been $2 or $3, that's money that you feed your kids with. So you can afford to pay those poll taxes. And of course, most African Americans were now trying to get an education, and many of them were still illiterate. So there you go, you cut out a whole bunch of African Americans because of these two rules. Another victory occurred in Louisville, Kentucky, when the Supreme Court struck down a law that required residential segregation. Okay? Then in the NAACP in 1918 also tried to get a federal law banning lynching. This law was called the Dyer Bill. As we know that lynching was a horrendous crime against, there were others other than black people that were lynched, but the majority of those lynched were black. But of course, Democratic opposition in the Senate prevented this bill from passing. So it was never, the Dyer Bill, it passed the House, but it never passed the Senate. James Weldon Johnson, from whom we have, or the black national anthem, he was a leader. He encouraged African Americans to leave the Republican Party and to join the Democratic Party. But they could join in the North, but every state in the South prevented African Americans from joining the party. So what did the NAACP do? Okay, they're going to go to court. And it's through going to court that they're going to gain access to the Democratic Party. They had two cases, one in 1921 and then one in 1947. 1927 and 1941, I reversed it. Nixon versus Herndon allowed blacks into the Democratic Party, but they were not allowed to vote in the primary. Why primary? Well, because they didn't want African Americans choosing the candidates to run. You can vote in the general election, but not in the primary. Sounds backward, doesn't it? But yeah, but that was overturned by the court case Smith versus Allwright, Texas, white primary law, 1941. And then you had another court case here, Gaines versus Canada. Gaines was a young black man who wanted to study law, but there was no law school in Missouri for black people, so he was given money to go out of state to law school. He decided not to take the money, but rather to sue. Many people might have taken the money and said, okay, I got the money, I'll go. But he decided not to go and sued, and something happened to him. He disappeared. No one knows what happened to him after that. But that was a success. And then this one here, Sweat versus Painter, this one set a precedent to bring down Jim Crow in 1954, okay? Everyone knows what a precedent is. A case that sets a precedent is a case that you can use for a newer case to try to, get justice or whatever you're doing. So it set a precedent for Brown versus Board of Ed. By the mid-1850s, things remained pretty much the same for African Americans. Southern states determined not to follow the Brown ruling. The Brown versus Board of Ed of Topeka, Kansas, ruled that it was illegal to separate students, in the busing, and of course it essentially brought down Jim Crow laws. But the southern states decided, okay, so you ruled, you made a rule. Now, they didn't say this, but I have to put it this way. See now if you can come and enforce it. So they refused to follow the ruling in the Brown versus Board of Ed. But some believe that the brutal lynching of 14-year-old Emmett Till in the summer of 1855 was a reaction to the Brown ruling. Okay? December that same year, Rosa Parks arrested for refusing to give up her seat on the bus and to a white male, and the civil rights is birthed in earnest from this event. The subsequent Montgomery bus boycott convinced white America that the movement was determined to bring about change in the country for African Americans. Now, anything more would be a completely separate lecture. We'd have to go into all the different, victories and maladies of the civil rights movement, but essentially, this is how we got to the civil rights movement. And that's the end of the lecture. I'm open to questions. Yes.
Where does the HBCU system fit into that history? When does that start?
Well, HBCU started even earlier, very, very early. During Reconstruction, you had a lot of HBCUs started. Of course, they weren't called that then, but yeah, many of them were started to educate black people. Booker T. Washington himself started one today that we know is Tuskegee University, but it started as Tuskegee Institute. We had some in Virginia, we had some other place. We had Fisk that was started. So we had a bunch of them start very early during the time after the Civil War. Yeah. Yes.
Mr. DuBois has been described sometimes as the creator of sociology, the study of people and behaviors and things. And I just wanted to know, do you know whether his writings were read by white people at the time?
Oh, yes. Definitely. He was great friends with William Lloyd Garrison, who's white and the greatest abolitionist that we've had, and other white people too, and that helped them. You're talking about which one? You said DuBois?
Yeah.
Yes, DuBois. Yeah, his writings were read quite a lot by different people, different races. Yes. Eventually, though, he became so fed up with the lack of progress that he left in, I think it was 1969, and he left to go to Ghana. He was invited by the president of Ghana, and that's where he's buried today. He lived there for another 3 years, but he was also having some problems with the NAACP as well, because he had he kind of lost his track, and during civil rights, he was doing different things. They felt he was sympathetic toward communists and all that, and the nation was sort of, the leaders were sort of after him. So when he did get the chance, he was banned for a while, even from leaving the country. And when he did get the chance to leave, he left and he went to Ghana, modern day Ghana, and he died there in 1972. Yes. Yes. Questions? Yes.
Actually, I'd like to ask you a question about any foreign influence in this U.S. domestic movement which you just described for us. In other words, any European countries push certain way and communicated with those leaders.
You doing the what?
Encouraging them to be.
In the 1800s?
Yeah.
What you mean, like abolition movement and all that?
Yes.
Well, we did have some very influential leaders. For example, there was an abolitionist in Wilberforce, William Wilberforce. Anyone ever heard of him? He was one that helped to end slavery in England and in and was a force in the later ending of slavery in the Caribbean as well. And he was certainly a model for Americans in abolition. Yes. Does that answer your question, or?
Actually, just I'm curious, any leaders you describe or the people who went voluntarily to go for help, more for international influence?
Oh, I see. Yeah. I have to think about that. Did they go for international help?
Just I'm curious.
Because we got
French influence or any European countries that were.
No, I don't think we had any European countries that really helped us. You know, I think it was pretty much on the backs of the abolition movement, black and white. It was on their backs. It was much on their backs. I don't think we had any outside influence.
The reason why I'm asking you that is the way this country was built was quite accidental, and
Yes.
meaning that happened to be the big wars between European countries happened to have the kind of vacuum environment where
Yeah.
American independence became real.
Yes.
Is that the same way in a kind
No,
of
no,
civil
no.
rights movement?
No, I would say no, because I know for our independence we had help from France. You know, for example, France was the first to recognize our independence when our Declaration of Independence. But for the abolition movement and the end of slavery, we didn't have that kind of help. We didn't have outside help.
Well, they were, the European nations were enslavers as well. So
Yes.
there was no help. France was enslaving Haiti in the Haitian Revolution in 1804. In fact, they became free of slavery before the U.S. General Toussaint Overture and
Yes.
Dessalines. So
But again, that was because of a rebellion too.
yeah, but
Led by
going
Toussaint
back to
Overture, yes.
abolitionists, like you said. And one other point you had asked about John Brown. I didn't see a lot of hands that were raised, but John Brown was a white guy.
Yes.
And he gave his life, and
He gave his life and his sons as well.
That should be noted. So it wasn't he didn't break the law. It was by any means necessary. We applaud John Brown.
Well, many felt that he broke the law, but you know, I like him. Yes. Yes.
I have a question about the southern, not the southern states, but the northern states.
Mhm.
My understanding is there were people who had slaves in the so-called northern states.
Yes.
Now, was that a state by state, what the laws were, and say in New York State or?
Yeah, well, I mean, you had slavery throughout the North, even up to the Civil War. For example, in Massachusetts, when the Civil War started, I think there were about 14 slaves left. So they still had slavery. And Massachusetts was one of the freest states. You know, even during slavery, it was a place where if you had a choice to go as a slave to a state, you would want to go to Massachusetts. But yes, even up to the Civil War, there were northern states that had slaves. But the majority, I would say, in the North, the majority of people in the North, you know, did not look favorably on slavery. And that's why I think that the Civil War had a measure that caused it to be successful, because the majority didn't think that it was, you know, something they wanted to hold on to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What religious groups were against slavery?
First, the Quakers. We had Quakers who lived here in New Jersey, Quakers in Pennsylvania. They were the first abolitionists. The Quakers were the first abolitionists, a religious group. As a matter of fact, I believe just before the Revolutionary War, or just after, the Quakers had banned their members from owning slaves. So if you owned a slave as a Quaker, you could not be Quaker anymore. So that was definitely a religious group that was right up front as the beginners of the abolition movement. Yes.
I mean, when you present this, you realize how many hundreds of years and how many thousands of people it took to achieve this much for the degree of equality in this country. So now it's a little frightening. Do you have any suggestions to what we can as individuals do to help anything being reversed and to keep things moving forward?
Well, yeah, I know. It is very scary. I agree. I see what you're saying. I think you wanted to answer that question for.
NAACP Education Fund. Give to the NAACP Education Fund.
Given to that fund? Okay.
That helps.
You know, to answer your question, though, I would say that, you know, we have to we have to stay positive. You know, one of the things that, if I were to be teaching on the civil rights movement fully, I would talk about how positive the movements, you know, remained. They were nonviolent, but they remained positive, even in the face of all the horrible things that happened to them as peaceful marchers, marching and gathering peaceful. Dogs were let out on them, hoses were, and they remained peaceful. They were willing even to go to jail, you know. I mean, he took the example from Mahatma Gandhi, but, you know, so they remained positive. That change was going to come. So that's what we have to do. We have to remain positive. Yes.
We have a question.
Yes.
Well, when you spoke earlier about the people in the North, they hated slavery. But wasn't a big push for the competition in labor, where they weren't paying the slave. Well, the slaves were living off subsistence, and the people in the North had to have a wage. And if they kept having to compete with the slaves, they would not be able to live. So wasn't that a big catalyst for the Civil War as well?
Are you talking about? Could you repeat it again? Because
basically, what I'm saying is that part of the reason I also understand that a lot of people in the North did not like slavery was because of the competition for labor, the cost of labor, meaning that people in the North wouldn't get paid if they had to compete with slaves for the same job. So that was part of the reason why they did not like slavery as well.
Well, I thought really the opposite, because even like the industries, for example, the textile industry in New England, you know, they were getting their cotton from the South. So I would think that they would want, you know, slavery to continue.